Jerusalem is about to fall. The army is dead. The king is gone. The knights are prisoners or corpses scattered across the desert. The walls are undermanned. The population is panicked. And the horizon is filling with banners that belong to a man who has already shattered every field army sent against him. And the man now responsible for 40,000 lives was never supposed to be in command in the first place. In the movie Kingdom of Heaven, Hollywood tells you Balian was a blacksmith who found honor. History tells you he was a noble who inherited a catastrophe. This is not a story about winning battles. This is a story about what leadership looks like when the war is already lost. Balian of Ibelin was born into power, not poverty. He was a product of the Crusader aristocracy, raised in the fractured, violent frontier world of the Levant, where castles were built for survival, not romance, and politics were conducted with steel as often as with ink. The Ibelin family were not minor lords scraping by on scraps. They were one of the dominant dynasties in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, deeply embedded in the military command structure, land ownership, and court politics of the Crusader state. Balian grew up surrounded by sieges, treaties, betrayals, shifting alliances, and the constant reality that every generation was one bad campaign away from extinction. He was trained as a knight, educated in command, diplomacy, and estate management, and married into one of the most powerful families in the region, connecting him directly to royal bloodlines and Byzantine influence. This was not a wandering idealist searching for purpose. This was a seasoned political and military operator who understood how fragile the entire Crusader experiment really was. By the 1180s, that fragility was becoming impossible to ignore. Internally, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was a pressure cooker of rival factions, competing nobles, reckless war hawks, cautious diplomats, religious zealots, and succession crises. Externally, a far more dangerous reality was forming across the desert. Saladin had done what no Muslim leader had managed to accomplish for generations. He unified Egypt, Syria, and much of the surrounding Islamic world under a single command structure, learning from earlier defeats and slowly building a disciplined, professional war machine that could sustain prolonged campaigns instead of symbolic raids. For a time, the kingdom survived on the sheer competence and willpower of King Baldwin IV, the leper king. Baldwin was physically dying, but strategically brilliant, holding the fragile coalition together through personal authority and battlefield command. Balian fought under him, gaining first-hand experience of large-scale engagements and operational maneuver warfare against Saladin's forces. Victories like Montgisard proved that the Crusaders could still strike hard when leadership was unified and disciplined. But Baldwin could not hold the system together forever. His death removed the final stabilizing force. What followed was political fragmentation, incompetent leadership, personal ambition overriding strategic reality, and reckless military decisions that ignored logistical constraints and intelligence warnings. That arrogance detonated in the summer of 1187 at the Battle of Hattin. The Crusader field army marched into the desert under brutal heat, cut off from water, harassed continuously by Saladin's mobile forces, and forced into a disastrous engagement on ground completely favorable to the enemy. The result was annihilation. The army collapsed. Thousands were killed. The kingdom's military leadership was captured or executed. The true cross was lost. The professional fighting force that protected Jerusalem effectively ceased to exist in a single catastrophic day. Hattin was not merely a defeat. It was strategic decapitation. With the field army gone, every fortified city became a waiting room for siege. Acre fell, Jaffa fell, city after city collapsed as Saladin's forces rolled forward with overwhelming momentum. Jerusalem, the symbolic heart of the Crusader world, stood exposed with almost no professional soldiers left to defend it. Balian was not meant to be part of this chapter at all. After Hattin, he sought safe passage from Saladin to travel through Muslim-held territory to retrieve his wife and children from Jerusalem. Saladin granted it, under a formal oath that Balian would not take up arms against him and would depart the city peacefully once his family was secured. It was a gesture of chivalric protocol that both sides still respected in that era, even amid total war. When Balian entered Jerusalem, he found a city on the edge of psychological collapse. Refugees flooded the streets, supplies were limited, discipline was fraying. The remaining knights could be counted in handfuls. The walls were old, undermanned, and partially damaged. The leadership was paralyzed by fear and indecision. There was no coherent command structure capable of organizing a defense. The city's leaders begged Balian to stay, and suddenly the oath became a problem. Honor demanded he leave. Reality demanded he stay. If he honored his promise and walked away, Jerusalem would face assault without any competent military leadership. The result would almost certainly be mass slaughter, enslavement, and religious vengeance as the city fell by storm. If he broke the oath, he violated the code that allowed medieval warfare to function with any restraint at all. Balian chose to stay. He informed Saladin that he would break the oath and take command of the defense, fully accepting whatever consequences that decision might bring. Saladin, understanding the reality of the situation, acknowledged the choice without theatrical outrage. The war resumed its logic. Balian inherited a nightmare. Jerusalem possessed almost no trained heavy cavalry left. Knights were the backbone of medieval battlefield dominance, serving as shock troops, officers, and morale anchors. Without them, a city's defensive cohesion collapsed rapidly. Balian compensated by knighting dozens of civilians. Not because it magically created elite warriors, but because it created a leadership structure capable of organizing militia sectors, managing supply distribution, enforcing discipline, and maintaining morale under bombardment. He divided the walls into defensive zones, assigned commanders, stockpiled ammunition, repaired breaches as best as possible, rationed food and water, and imposed order on a terrified civilian population. Saladin's army encircled the city with overwhelming numerical superiority. Siege engines battered the walls relentlessly. Probing attacks tested weak points. Archers suppressed defenders. Engineers worked methodically to open breaches. This was professional siege warfare, conducted by an army that had already crushed every organized resistance in its path. Jerusalem could not hold indefinitely. Every additional day of resistance meant more dead civilians, more destroyed infrastructure, and fewer bargaining chips once the walls inevitably failed. The city's value was symbolic, not tactical. Saladin did not need to preserve it intact if forced to storm it. The longer the siege lasted, the worse the final outcome would become. So Balian shifted the objective. Victory was no longer holding the city. Victory became preventing a massacre. He opened negotiations with Saladin under brutal honesty. If Saladin assaulted the city, Balian warned, the defenders would destroy holy sites, poison wells, burn sacred locations, and fight house to house until nothing of value remained. It was not a bluff born of bravado. It was a calculated deterrent strategy designed to raise the cost of conquest beyond symbolic benefit. Saladin, pragmatic and politically aware, recognized the reality. Jerusalem was sacred to Islam as well. A bloodbath inside its walls would poison his victory and undermine his legitimacy across the Muslim world. Negotiations produced a surrender rather than a storming of the city. Civilians would be allowed to ransom themselves and leave. Churches would be protected. The population would evacuate under supervision instead of being massacred or enslaved en masse. Many of the poorest inhabitants were ultimately released without payment when ransoms could not be met. On October 2nd, 1187, Jerusalem passed into Saladin's control without the slaughter that had defined its capture in 1099 during the First Crusade. After the surrender, Balian remained politically active during the Third Crusade, operating as a negotiator, power broker, and stabilizing figure within what remained of the Crusader states. He did not fade into myth or exile. He continued navigating a shattered geopolitical landscape where survival depended less on battlefield glory and more on restraint, compromise, and long-term calculation. His legacy is not carved into triumphant monuments or glorious charge paintings. It exists in the absence of mass graves. History rarely celebrates men who prevent catastrophes instead of creating legends. But in warfare, preventing disaster is often the highest form of competence. Hollywood loves heroes who win impossible battles. Reality remembers leaders who understand when the battle is already lost and still choose to protect what remains worth saving. In war, sometimes the only real victory is limiting the damage, and that may be the hardest command decision any leader will ever make.